how did they try to do that? Well, it was the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee that began that process. And they knew that the government cannot overturn the decision, the Nirex Inquiry decision, which says that the Longlands Farm site is unsuitable for further investigation, without risking legal challenge, because the inspector said that they had gone to that site as a result of an irrational site selection process and that it wasn't suitable. So the strategy is to get the local councils to do a U-turn and to rule that area that's been ruled out back in as suitable for further investigation. And the danger of that is that in future, if the government then says we're going to go ahead, whatever you people in West Cumbria think, that the councils will not be able to bring a legal case against the government as they did before, because they will have already said, we think this area is suitable for geological investigation, and they would therefore need new evidence to do another U-turn. So the process by which the local councils are supposed to make not suitable, the inspector's conclusion, into suitable, is the decision to participate. How did we get to this position? Well, the Lords report, the Lords Science and Technology Committee report in 1999, recommended changing planning law so that the scientific evidence could never again be cross-examined as it was at the Nirex Inquiry. They recommended paying local compensation, and they recommended setting up a new committee, which is what the quorum became, to devise a process to come back here to West Cumbria. And they explicitly refused to consider why the site had been ruled out, so all the information that I've told you now. And they visited Longland Farm, and a whistleblower told Cumbrians opposed to radioactive environment that they said while they were there that the repository would be back. So this is the newspaper article that reports that, and the whistleblower says in a handwritten letter, after the Lords left, a few others stayed with much slapping of backs and joviality. We learned from the BNFL engineer overseeing the work that the covers would be coming off in 2 years and the go-ahead given for building not only the rock lab, but the store itself. That didn't happen within 2 years because in 1999, Nirex, as a first step, applied to extend the planning permission on its boreholes. But objectors, including Core and others, and I was one of the objectors, said, you got planning permission for the boreholes on the grounds that they were to investigate whether or not this site is suitable for burying nuclear waste. But the inquiry has ruled it out as unsuitable, so you have to fill them in. And we won that debate, and the council had 2 votes on committee, and those boreholes were filled in because they were no longer required for their original purpose. So why are we back here now? Well, what happened in 2007 is that some new geological criteria were written. And I'm sure it's a coincidence, but Professor Sir Keith O'Nyans was given a new post called Government Director of Science, which was newly invented for a period of only 2 years, and which involved a significant promotion for him. And he was the only geologist who was not directly employed by Nirex, but who gave evidence in favour of their planning application back at the Nirex Inquiry back in 1997. What we ended up with was some geological criteria which the Royal Society themselves criticised in a letter to DEFRA at that time, saying, it seems to us most unlikely that such work can be done carefully, robustly and credibly in a few weeks. And yet by April 2007, the same year, West Cumbria was invited to express an interest, and in May the geological criteria were published. The purpose of those criteria is to create confusion about what areas are suitable for further investigation. So that British Geological Survey map rules out some areas as unsuitable, does that correctly, but it doesn't rule out all the areas that are unsuitable. It doesn't rule out Longlands Farm, but it also doesn't explicitly say that Longlands Farm is suitable. And that's the hidden trick. Cumbria and the councils are supposed to volunteer the site and the area around as suitable. In other words, to say exactly the opposite of what they said before when they fought at that inquiry. This is figure 1 from the MRWS consultation, and you can see when it says "we are here," it's under a little box saying potentially suitable. So it treats West Cumbria as if it's already been divided into unsuitable and potentially suitable by that BGS map. But this is not correct, because Longlands Farm and other sites in Cumbria are not potentially suitable. So a decision to participate on that basis overturns the Nirex Inquiry and all the evidence that Cumbria gave to that inquiry and the decision about the boreholes in 1999. On what basis would you rule Longlands Farm back in as potentially suitable when it's been ruled out as unsuitable? And what would happen later if the government later pressed ahead? How would councils be able to challenge a decision that treated a site as potentially suitable if they'd volunteered that themselves? So to sum up, the geology hasn't changed. The hydrogeology, the flow of water through the rock, has not changed. It's still unsuitable. The safety issues are much, much more serious. You're talking about a much larger quantity of more dangerous waste, heat-generating wastes, and also potentially co-disposal of heat-generating waste and gas-generating waste, the intermediate level waste originally part of the Nirex Inquiry. Science and technology has moved on. Yes, it has. There are much more sophisticated computer models. There's much more understanding. But that understanding has identified new complexities and new problems, including the potential corrosion of copper, the generation of gas, which was not considered in detail at the Nirex Inquiry, and the effects of heat on clay. The site selection is still political. It's a completely different process, but it's still intended to come back here. And it still fails to optimise safety, in other words, to give a high weight to the potential safety of future generations. And you have a larger footprint, you have potential impacts on the national park, you need encapsulating facilities, and you have therefore increased blight to the local area. What are the legal issues? I'm not a lawyer, I should say, but the change in planning law does not remove the legal requirement to choose the right geology. In other words, to optimise radiological protection. Choose somewhere that's going to maximise your chances of protecting future generations. And the failure to consider the geological suitability could lead to an unsafe site, partly because money will be poured into digging holes, boreholes, and potentially another rock characterisation facility, or it will just waste public money if you spend that money and then walk away. So the BGS criteria, the British Geological Survey criteria on that map are necessary, but they're not sufficient. The Nirex Inquiry findings have to be taken into account. And there's no reason to justify a U-turn, because the new plans are less safe. And we have to think about what basis would councils be able to challenge a future government decision if they overturn the Nirex Inquiry findings now. So my conclusions should be by now rather obvious. A deep nuclear waste repository does pose risks to future generations, and part of trying to minimise those risks and to optimise radiological protection, which is a legal requirement, is site selection. Councillors, people making a decision, have a moral and legal obligation to consider all the existing geological information that's available to them now, because only new information can be considered later. A decision to participate basically means overturning the 1997 Nirex Inquiry findings, because it would be ruling back in an area that inquiry found to be geologically unsuitable. And there's no rational basis for that decision, and it might not be reversible. And I just want to finish with some acknowledgements to Professor Hazelden and Professor Smythe, whose evidence to the consultation I've drawn on, and I've used some of their slides. And just remind you of what they said way back in 1997. In conclusion, Sellafield was always a long shot. The site was chosen for non-scientific reasons in a decision-making process which concealed its true geological problems. Thank you.